Hey, it's Melody. Welcome to Magic Happens with Melody Who. I will start by addressing the elephant in the room. Why, oh why, did I start my own podcast? For a very long time, I did not think of starting my own podcast. I'm not a celebrity. I have not 100x my company. It just didn't feel like something that really made sense. I'm not sure why people will want to listen to my point of view. And recently, I met my now friend Yehuda at Boulder Startup Week, who helps run a company called Let's Do Podcast. So he said, if you're ever interested in starting your own podcast, let me know. And I immediately told him I have no interest in starting my own podcast. So we started discussing the idea of podcast and what someone ordinary like me could possibly bring to the table. And then I guess it was kind of as a challenge. He said, my dad has a podcast. And I said, sure, that sounds like fun. I went to Dr. B's podcast. We were sitting across the table from each other. There was a camera on the side, but I really didn't pay much attention to the camera because I was just fascinated by this person in front of me. So he started asking me questions, but I realized I want to ask him questions. I want to know where he's from, where did he grow up, what led him to do what he does, how did he meet his wife, how did they raise such amazing children. At the end of the session, Dr. B said, you know what, I think you should have your own podcast. And here I am. In a way, the spell on that specific limiting belief was broken. I thought having a podcast means that you're an expert in a specific field. You have a lot to teach, or you can invite very high-profile guests. What I learned from these recent encounters is that I don't have to be an expert. But what I do have is endless curiosity. So I will invite different guests to my podcast and just ask them all the questions that I want to ask, but on camera. The second reason for starting a podcast right now. I think by now we've all heard that having a personal brand is important, regardless of what field you're in. In my case, I happen to be an entertainer. I act, sing, and dance, and I'm making my own documentary film. I run a few companies, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I also happen to be an intuitive guide. So you'd think, yeah, you probably need to get yourself known. Otherwise, who would know about what you have to offer? Who would want to hire you to be in a commercial film project? How can people discover your company and the products that you've created? And how can people, when they're in need, find you to be their intuitive guide? I really had trouble finding that through line that would make people understand who I am. In reality, we all know when we meet someone in person that they're multidimensional beings, and we love them and know them for the entire person that they are. Forget about all the niche down, pick one lane kind of talk. That's how I overcame the which lane do I pick conundrum. Be warned that we might deep dive into a lot of different types of topics, and that's okay. What about you? Are you a multi-passionate? Are you a software engineer during the day and you moonlight as the pinball league champion in your local league? Let me know. Leave me a comment. So from my point of view today, having a podcast doesn't mean that I want to build my personal brand so I can monetize, I can become a famous influencer or celebrity. None of that really matters. But what really matters is for the people that do find me, we get to have our own little tribe. You get to know how I think, you get to meet the fascinating people I get to meet, and we get to have conversations and in some ways maybe support each other. I truly believe that we are all meant to create, and creating is our birthright. I've never met a little toddler that did not create or that was afraid to show her work to the world. When you meet toddlers, you have, look at my painting, or listen to my song, or all these different exciting endeavors. And the most important thing is that they're fully immersed in that creative endeavor. They're really not evaluating, is this going to make millions? Is this going to make me known? Is this going to bring abundance? How can I manifest? Because living is the most important creative act that we can do. Hey, if you're here, can you do me a favor? Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Melody Who, or subscribe to Magic Happens with Melody Who on all major podcast platforms. In this way, my happy face and my happy voice will be here when you need a little sunshine. Something to think about is when you do that one thing that you've always wanted to do but have always pushed away. What you're experiencing is resistance. There's a wonderful book that I have to share. It's called The War of Art: Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles. Not to be confused with The Art of War by Sun Tzu. It is by Stephen Pressfield, and in fact, I have stocked a few copies and I keep on handing out to friends that are creatives that's always said, oh, I've always wanted to do this and that, but I haven't done it yet. We experience the most resistance when we approach that one thing that we know will bring the biggest impact in our lives. Resistance shows up at the threshold of something you really, really want. Why? Because the stakes are higher, because you know potentially that is going to change your life, because you know that potentially that is going to shift your identity, because you know that might be closer to your dream life that you're not currently living. And that difference, that gap, makes you scared. And we all experience that same sensation. And that sensation, from an emotional point of view, is called fear. So what is fear? We can go back and say this is an evolutionary trait. You know, it's that saber-toothed tiger chasing us as little primates and we want to run away, and it gives us that fight or flight instinct. In today's world, it means putting yourself out there, showing people you don't know that you're a little different. And that fear comes from losing the tribal trust or standing out too much in a society where coherence or fitting in really makes you feel safe. But let's talk about safe and what it is. There's no such thing as safe. At the end of the day, we all die. So, just realize that starting a business, starting a podcast, starting your film probably won't lead to your final demise. Hopefully not. The book talks about all different ways that you can break through those blocks and finally defeat resistance. But for me, here's a small example. I was worried to launch my podcast because people might think that I'm crazy to undertake yet another project while I'm already running a few businesses, auditioning for different roles, raising 2 kids and 3 cats. The challenge is to say, okay, I'm going to push through my comfort zone just a little step today, tiny little baby step, and let's see what happens. And if you do it on an incremental basis, you won't feel a gigantic shift. It won't be something that's day and night, but you'll just gradually habituate yourself to a new reality ahead. Another book on this topic would be Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he talks about how little incremental habits will make the biggest shift. If there's a project that you've always wanted to pursue, an artwork, a film project, a business, a new career, here is your sign to take your first step, maybe setting up the environment where you can habituate yourself to work on that a tiny little bit every day. At the end of the day, magic happens when imagination meets action. We're all gifted with something called imagination. You can use it and imagine the best possible outcome, or you can use it to imagine the worst possible outcome. Given the choice, and you never know what will happen anyway, I'd say imagine the most amazing outcome and take one tiny little action per day. And then sit back and observe that magic happens. Drop me a comment, let me know what your creative project is that's gnawing at you and what your tiny little action might be today. Thank you for listening to Magic Happens. I'm your host, Melody Hu. I hope to see you next time.